We're working on Chapter 6 tonight, and Chapter 6 is kind of an exciting chapter, I think, because it really unlocks one of the real powerful tools that we have in this .NET environment, and that's basically master pages. And I encourage you to kind of read all the text here. But the whole point of using master pages is kind of a recognizing of the fact that most websites will have either one consistent structure or a couple of consistent structures that they use to display content. So it's not unusual for web pages to have a consistent type of look. And the one thing that we do to create a consistent look is to create a thing called a master page. And a master page will hold parts of the page that are always the same for each page. So that often is like the basic layout, the header sections and the footer sections, maybe the sidebars, certainly the navigation, and then those components go into a master page, which is then uses the basically the building block to build all your other pages. So you create a region of that page in the middle, usually, that will take the content that's particular to that page, and all the rest of it is the same, right? And that's a pretty common thing. So when we do that, you're going to notice that at the top of our documents, so we won't need to recreate certain things in every document. So if we have our doc type at the top and it's got the header and the navigation in it, that part doesn't need to be added to each page. All we need to do is create the stuff in the middle for each page. And then this little directive at the top will indicate to the page that we do have a master page file. Take whatever I've got here and insert it into that page, and then output the page to the screen. So that's a really powerful thing. So here's a kind of a graphic of that. So recognizing that repeating pattern. So this is a somewhat common type of layout where we have a header at the top and maybe a navigation bar on the left. You often see navigation going across the top right underneath the header as well. But those are things that will repeat on every page. The header might be identical and the menu might be identical. And then what we do is on the master page, we will just create an area of that master page that will be just sitting there waiting to receive the content. So when we code a separate page, let's say we have an About Us page or something like that, we're just going to write the code that goes into this area. We're not going to worry about the other code because the master page is already going to hold it for us. And if you guys have done your PHP class, you guys learned some stuff like that. And what you probably learned is to create like an index PHP page that includes the header and includes the menu. This is kind of a variation of that. But the master page is a little bit different, where we kind of actually create little areas that we can dynamically populate. And by default, the areas that we dynamically populate are things that get inserted into the head section of the document, and we're going to see this in a little bit, and into the content areas. And you can really ramp it up to be much more sophisticated, but those are the two parts that we typically see. All right, let's just jump in to get into work here. Before this video started, I did go ahead and I made a backup of my site, so I have a complete version of Chapter 5 here to work with. That version is also here, so I'm all set to build. Always make versions of your works folders. I think I've probably said it enough already that you guys are getting into that mindset. And then we want to go into Visual Studio and make sure that we are opening up that project. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the website here. And I got to make sure I'm in the right class. And I always like to expand that to make sure I'm on the right level. Let's go ahead and open up the project. All right. Then you see the structure that we've been working with. All right, so we are going to begin with the first set of instructions. And I don't know if you guys recall this, but we actually did create a master page way back when already. And that was kind of one of the early little exercises, and we are going to kind of revisit that. So that's what the author is indicating here. And he's showing us that we did create a folder called Master Pages. And inside that folder is a thing called Front-End Master and the code behind file that goes with it, that's automatically created. All right, so now they want us to go back to this folder, and they want us to right-click this folder and choose Add New Item. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to choose Add New Item, because the item that we're looking for is not on that list. That's the reason. All right, so what we're looking for is actually a master page. Make sure that your language in the left-hand column here is C#. So we want to make sure we choose master page with Visual C#. And we do want to name this front-end master. Now, I already have created this, right? Should I go ahead and overwrite it? I don't see any problem with that, frankly. So I'm just going to go ahead and create front-end master. Do I want to replace it? I'm just going to go ahead and say yes. Yes. So it's asking for both the code behind and the other file. So I realize this is redundant. It already existed, but just in case you're working from scratch or you've got the blank folder, this is how you add it. So master page is one of those components that you can choose for your project. One question I often get at this stage is, can you have more than one master page? Well, guess what? You can, right? And the rationale behind that is, like, think about when you go to like certain websites, you'll have certain pages that have certain looks, and then you'll go to other pages and they'll have other looks. So we can have some pages that work off of one master and some pages that work off of a different one. So you might have, different styles depending on, the content you're working with. And really the project kind of drives the need for what type you're using and what it looks like. All right. Now we're going to go into the code here, and what they want us to do is add a bunch of code in between the form tags. And what they're doing, and if you look at the book, they have a whole section that they want you to replace it with. So really, we are just going to blow all this away. So just deleting it. And right in the middle here, I'm going to grab the code from step number 3, top of page 211, and just paste it in between the form tags. Oh, you are right. Thank you so much. Don't do what your teacher's doing. Right, because I still have all these other things open from the previous work that we were doing. All right, so I'm closing all those. The file I want open is the front-end master. Okay, thank you very much for the correction, sir. Thank you. All right, so here we are. Same approach, though. I'm deleting everything that's in between the form tags, and then I'm going to be replacing it with the code from the book, which has a couple of alterations. I am going to highlight this all and do a format on it just so it all sits nicely. But let's take a look at a couple of things that are happening here code-wise. And I know the book does explain this, but they have the tendency to explain it after we do the steps. And I want to explain it as we're doing the steps. All right, so take a look at what we've created, and let's just work from the top down. First of all, take a look at the first line and the fact that we have an ASP-style bracketed tag, so we have the % sign inside a bracket. And then, as we saw in the lecture stuff above, we're declaring our language. Notice that we have the keyword master here, so that's a special directive to the .NET engine. And then also notice that we have an attached code file that you've seen before, but more importantly, that we are inheriting from the master page's front end. Now, keep in mind, this is our master page, but there is a structure somewhere in the .NET thing that we're pulling in from. So that's a keyword for you. Notice on this page that we have our complete HTML structure. So if I zoom in on the HTML code here a little bit, you'll see that we do have a doc type. We have our HTML tags, our head tag, our body tag, and then As with many web form pages, the whole page is really kind of encapsulated inside of a form. It just enables a bunch of capabilities. But more importantly, we have a couple of ASP tags, one in the head and then one in the body. And these are special types of tags. Notice they are content placeholders. So anytime that we go to create a new page for this project, we will have the option to attach it to this master page. And when we do that, it will pull in this whole structure with those two content placeholders coming with it. And then the content that you create on that page will then get inserted into those two spots. So if you have special JavaScript or CSS or some other strange directive that goes in the head section, you can drop that in dynamically. But most often what you're going to be doing is creating the content that goes on that page and no other page. And that will go into this section. So this is exactly what it sounds like. It is a content placeholder. It's just waiting to receive content. And the content it's going to receive is a fragment of an HTML page, not an entire HTML page. So if I go to create a page, I'm going to write the portion of the page that fits in here. I don't need to put a doc type in. I don't need to put my whole HTML structure in, just the stuff that goes in that spot. So this really is kind of like an include in PHP, right? This is a different approach, but the same thing conceptually. All right. So we have our structure now, and you notice that structure, we have a wrapper for the whole page that helps us to style everything, center it up on the page. We have a header section, we have a navigation section, and then there's a section section, which is going to hold that content. We also have an aside and a footer. So what we're going to see now is that all the pages are going to have all of these components in common, and that's going to allow us to keep that consistency. Now, they want us to now jump into design view, and I'm on step number 4, page 211. And here they want us to drag, and this is kind of fascinating, right? Because the other times we've done this is we've dragged it right into the code view. But yeah, you can drag the style sheet into the design view as well, just a matter of where it's going to drag to. So we're going to go and find the CSS file that's in the styles folder, and we're going to drag it. And notice what happens. And that was kind of the point of it, right? To show that you can pull in the CSS and it attaches to the page automatically, and boom, you see the difference immediately, right? That structure that we created that is, arguably not so beautiful, but it's a start. It is a structure. It can be dynamically applied like that. Now, if you switch back over to the code view for this page, so click the source button at the bottom, you'll see that it did drop in the link using the appropriate approach. So make sure you check that. All right, the other thing that they would like us to do is also add the Modernizr, and this should be a habit that you get into in this book. They always want you to use it. And, well, I don't need to see the Modernizr, thank you. I just want to drag it in. So I'm just going to grab that and then drop that into the head section up here. So you should have something that looks like that. All right. So they want us to go ahead and save our work for now, and that actually completes this first exercise. So I'm bringing the book back over onto screen. And now we're going to work on actually creating the content pages. So we have the infrastructure, we applied our CSS, we dragged the Modernizr in, so we have the structure. Now we got to make stuff to go inside. All right, so let's do that. So step 1, bottom of page 212. All right. It says, in the previous exercises, you added standard ASPX pages to your project, which now need to be upgraded to make use of the new master page. So what it's telling us is that we have, like, for example, a default page here, which is great, but it does, notice, have its own doc type, it has its own CSS, and that's not what we want, right? So we want to, upgrade basically. All right, so what it's asking us to do now is to jump in and copy all the HTML that's in the main content area. So that would be in between these tags, in between the section tags. So I'm going to come in here and grab all this HTML. And then I'm just going to copy that, so now it's in my clipboard. If you want to be double safe, you could open up a different text editor, whatever tool it is, and paste it in there so you have a backup copy of it. Because God forbid you lose power and you lose the code and you got to recreate it, right? All right, so next thing that we want to do is we want to go and add a new item, and we're going to add this now to the root of our Solution Explorer here. So right-click, choose Add, Add New Item, right? And they want us to choose the right language. We want to choose a web form. All right. We want to name it the same thing we've named it already. Isn't that going to be problematic? Well, it might be. It's certainly going to ask us to override it, I hope. So default ASPX. Now notice that we have some new checkboxes here, right? They want us to place the code in a separate file, so we still want to do the code behind. But notice that we also have a checkbox for select master page. So this is telling us as we create it that it's going to be looking to join up with a master page. Go ahead and click Add. And they're going to come to this next screen here where, of course, if you've named it this way, you'll find it in the master pages folder. And you are going to select front end master and say OK. All right, so it asks us if we want to replace the file. We do. And then it says the file has been changed externally, has no unsaved changes. Do you want to reload it? What should I do? I know, I'll email my instructor. Right. Actually, read the screen, right? So it's saying that I modified stuff, has no unsaved changes. Do you want to reload? I'm just going to say no. Am I okay? I am. Okay. Now, what I want to do here, and the reason it gave me that message is because I did have it loaded up here, so I'm closing it, right? So, and granted, I'm overwriting the file, so the one that I was just seeing isn't the file anymore. Yeah. So now I'm going to come back here and click on this, and I'm going to notice, oh, what happened? Right? Everything went away. Now, nothing went away. What it's telling me is now I do have a link to a master page file. Notice that there's a keyword inside this first line of code for page. So this isn't a master page, this is just a page, implying that it needs a master, and then this points exactly to where that master file is. Right? And the code that you see up here, folks, this is stuff that typically you don't want to touch unless you know that you're going to attach to a different master page, for example. And that is a possibility. Now notice that we do have the basic structure for this content page. And all that is included here are two special ASP tags that are for content. Notice content placeholder on the master page, but content on the page itself. So if I wanted to, for example, include like a different CSS file, I might link it up right in this spot. And then that would insert itself automatically into this area of the master page when it renders. In the other section, this is the CP main content, that's going to drop into the content section of the front-end master or down here. So I think you can probably guess what the next step is. We're actually on well, actually, we should probably do what it says in step number 3 on page 214, which is to look at design view really quickly. And then notice, and I want to correct that, design view on the default page. Notice that unlike the other design views, I can't change anything up here. See how I get like the not symbol? So I can't go into the header and change it because it's not changeable from this location anymore. So I think that's kind of helpful. All right, so now I'm going to go back to the source code view here. And I am kind of skipping a couple of steps. They want us to actually put this up in the browser first. All right. I'm going to come to the source code view. I'm more comfortable doing it here. That's just me. And then I am also going to highlight all this stuff and do a right-click format selection just to clean it up a little bit. All right. So that's basically step number 6, bottom of page 214. And what I want to do now is save that. Now I am going to bring it up in the browser. So go ahead and click your play button up there. I'm going to run without debugging because I just want it to run. And I am zoomed in a little bit, but this is a regular view, and this is a 1600 by 900 display you're looking at right now. But you see that everything did go back to the way it was looking before. If you do something that's interesting, you guys need to do this when you're working with dynamic technologies, is once you have the output of your dynamic code, you should get into the habit of looking at the view source. This seems to all be syntactically correct. I don't see anything that looks problematic. But sometimes when you use these types of technology, you can break things. So like what you're doing in Visual Studio, and then when it goes to the browser, sometimes the tags are broken. So if you run into problems, this is one place where you can start. So you might see that you forgot a closing tag for something, or you didn't paste it in quite right. So that's one of the reasons why you want to do that. But you can see that it did successfully take the master page contents. Notice that one tag at the top isn't there, but we have our doc type, HTML, the title, all that stuff, and right up here we have the link to the CSS and the Modernizr. If I had inserted anything into the head section content placeholder, it would have dropped in right below these things. But down here, you see that in between the form tags and more importantly in the content area section, it did drop in, and I'm talking about this code right here, it did drop in the code that we added on that separate page, right? So you recognize where the stuff is coming from. So it seems to be working properly, which is a good thing. Yes, I was looking at that concert. Sorry. All right. Back over to Visual Studio. They want us to create a new page. So step number 7, top of page 215. I'm going to close this little output windows here. At the root of the site, so I'm going to click on Site, right-click. I'm going to add a new page based on the master page. Now notice that now that I've gone ahead and gone through that process, notice at the very bottom of that list, now I have an option to create a new web form with a master, and it's part of my quick list, right? So why not use that one, right? So it's going to follow the same pattern that we've been using. They want us to call it login.aspx. Which front-end master? Well, there's only one, so that's a pretty easy choice. And then we have the same basic type of thing. I want us to go into the markup view, and here we are. And in this section here, they want us to create an H1 element. And there it is. And inside that, they want us to put in some text. Log into Planet Rocks. All right. Everybody's good? All right. Right now, we're not really worried about content in the other areas according to the book. So go ahead. I would do a Control-S to save this page. They want us to go back to the default page now and go to Design View. And beneath the welcome text, so I'm assuming down here somewhere, they want us to create a new paragraph and type in some text. So I can create a new paragraph here by just pressing Enter, right? Does it automatically. And then they want us to drop in some text. So, for example, it says, you can log in here. And then they're making a special thing here saying that because I just came to this interface and pressed enter to create a new paragraph, that it automatically grabs the same class declaration. So you can see right above my little I-beam here, it says p.introduction, implying that it's a paragraph with a class of introduction. And that was done automatically. All right. So one thing that you can do, and the recommending that we do, is that we can actually use the Clear Styles option from the Apply Styles window. You got that? So where is that located? We don't have that window, do we, right? Are you guys going into panic mode? How would you get rid of the class then? Well, you know, frankly, I would just jump right to the source code. That's me, and I'm just going to delete it that way because that menu option is not going to exist. So that's one of those things that I always get questions on. But you guys, I'm hoping, are getting intuitive enough to figure this out now, right? So they want us to go back to kind of a generic look on this. And it says, the very last sentence of step 8, or manually remove it from the markup view. Thank you, author. Just in case we're not smart enough to figure it out on our own. All right. So they do want us to highlight the words login. Now they want us to be in design view for this, so fine, I'll do it from here. So I'm going to highlight the words login, and it might take a little holding down the shift key and some arrows or using your mouse. And then from the format menu it says convert to hyperlink. Right. There's also a little link button up on the toolbar, but this time they wanted us to do it this way. So I'm going to choose that. And then I can type in the link right to the page, or I can just come through this dialog and select login and click OK. And click OK again, and it converted it automatically to a link. All right, so now at this point they want us to save it. Click the play button. I'm going to run without debugging. And notice that we now have a link. I'm going to hover over it first, and I see way at the bottom right corner of my screen that it is pointing to that file. So I'm going to click on it, and it is taking us to that page. Right? So it seems to be working, and that's really all we wanted to accomplish so far. But really what's happened, folks, is we have successfully created 2 pages off the same template, and I can hit my back button here and notice that they both have a consistent look, that this one links me over, and it stays within the same structure. 2 pages built off of the same structure with a master page. Really pretty simple and pretty powerful. In the next section of readings, the author does talk about exactly what I've been mentioning all along. And he also talks here real briefly about nesting master pages. So I can nest one page. Now, this is where it gets a little deep, right? I already talked about having different master pages. But what if I had one master page that was based on another master page? So you can kind of go down a rabbit hole here. And you can do that in layers as well. So you can still have that main structure, and then have a substructure that's still built on the main structure. So you can do some pretty neat things. And that's kind of a fun thing to do, I think. All right, let's move on and talk about, actually, let's talk about this section here. Because this is actually, I think, a little bit important in terms of kind of like the life cycle of a page. So you notice it goes through all these different steps here. But when most people sit down to a machine and they request a web page, it's either by virtue of a link, or they might type in, the thing. But usually it's like a Google search result. You go to a website and you click on a menu option. It takes you somewhere and it gets you there. But either way, it's a page request. You're going to a page. So it loads up, and it'll do all the stuff that it needs. So, for example, when a page like this is going to load up, it's going to go to Visual, or go into your folder structure on the server, and let's say you request the default page. All right, let's look at it in code view and kind of walk through what is happening conceptually. So you request this page. The server looks at this and says, aha, this is a page. It's based on a master. So what is it doing? It goes to the master. So okay, let's render the master. Here's the code. And then I'm looking for my content. And then it goes back from these content placeholders back to the page that was requested and inserts the stuff from here into that structure. It also looks at any code that's sitting in the code behind of both the master and the front end and runs that code. So I can actually have code that executes on the front end, master, then we load the page, it executes that code, and we can still pull in more code, believe it or not. So we can do some pretty sophisticated things here, which is one of the reasons why we like this technology. So ultimately, it goes through those initialization steps, looking through that programming code, and finally, after executing anything that's in the load, page load area of that code, and it runs. And then we might do some things where we have forms, and a lot of interactive websites have forms of various sorts, either with buttons or input fields or drop-down boxes or drag and drops or whatever the form elements are, but they are forms. And often things that happen in forms need to be validated, especially if it's user entry. Okay, so that's the next step. After you do user entry, you can set up various types of postbacks. So in other words, interaction back to the server. You hit a button, you hit a drop-down, and it interacts with the server, and it does whatever it has to do, and then it sends stuff back to the browser. Finally, when you leave the page, it goes through the process of unloading it from memory, and depending on how the code is compiled or not compiled or operating on the fly, those things need to be cleared from memory to allow for other things to happen. So there's kind of like a little life cycle, and maybe this is maybe a little too granular to think about at this point, but it is important to understand that there's all these little interactions that are happening, things that are not happening when you do static HTML. Because when you do static HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, all that stuff's happening in the browser. When you throw this into the mix, there's a lot of stuff happening on the server before it hits the browser. And that's, I think, important to understand. Okay. All right. We start talking about a thing called a base page, and this is kind of a different approach. And the one clarity I want to point out here, because we're learning about a master page, which is a basic structure for all your web pages. Now we're learning about a base page, which is like kind of like a master page for all your code files. Kind of interesting, right? So that's going to be placed in a separate folder. So let's move this back off to the second screen here and move on. All right, so we are going to close the C# file for starters, but I'm going to right-click the app code folder. Uh-oh. Yeah, it was in the last chapter. Oops. Okay. Well, I guess I got to create that. Shows that I've been cheating a little bit, so let's go ahead and create that. So let's add a new item. And actually, I didn't have to go into this interface to do it, did I? Right? I can just right-click, add, new folder. It's a whole lot easier this way, but we will create app_code, spelled just like that because that's a special name for these types of projects. Inside here, I'm going to right-click, and then I'm going to add a new item. And inside here, we are going to select a class. And a class, just like in Java, is the basic structure of a programming page. So every file that's just a C# file is a class file. All right. This needs to be named, and we are going to name it base page. Capital B, capital P, no spaces. And go ahead and click Add. All right. So notice right off the top, just by virtue of creating it, any class file will have certain statements up at the top. The comparison to Java, of course, is that a using statement is the same as an import statement in Java. So we are pulling in a number of different system libraries automatically. And basically these are required for all the class pages in order for them to function as a website. They have some comment sections here, and they just basically give us the class file and then the constructor function. And you guys should be recognizing these things identical to what happens in Java. In Java, when we have a class file, that's the name of the whole file, and then every time you have a constructor function, it's named the same as the class file, but now it's a method. and there's preliminary steps that may or may not happen when you're constructing or instantiating the class, right? So what this is telling us as a base page or a base class file, that it's going to be used to instantiate code files on the fly that will become compiled. So this is kind of a cool thing. All right, so they do want us to clear the contents. Now, the book wants us to clear all the contents. All right. If you listen to what I just said, I recommend that you actually leave all of these alone. Don't worry about replacing all of it, but I do strongly suggest that you replace the stuff that's inside. So I'm going to do this really carefully because it's kind of spans over 2 pages, and then I want to talk about what's smart to copy and what's not smart to copy. And I want to try to do the copy first. I'm kind of struggling with my PDF here a little bit. All right, so here's the first bit of code, and I'm going to place this below the constructor function. The book would imply that we should delete that. Should we? No. In fact, actually, I'm seeing that he's actually leaving the constructor in there, but it's actually below. So I'm going to do this really, really carefully. So I have this part of it. So, and then he's got a little pre-render routine that he puts in the base page. And I'm just going to grab the code from inside that. And if you're trying to see what I mean, I'm just grabbing that part of it. And then that's going to go inside the constructor function here. All right. I am going to do a little highlight on this stuff and do a format if it allows me to, but it's not, so I'm not worrying about it too much. I can do it manually as well. All right. Help, there's underlines, right? Are you guys doing that too? Right, you should, because these aren't green underlines, these are red underlines. One thing that you guys will notice, and I'm going to pull the book back over onto screen here just for a moment, is there's a couple of differences, and I want to talk about those differences a little bit. The first thing I want to talk about is the fact that I want you to notice that this class declaration here, what was auto-created is really simple, right? And in the book, attached to it is this. Now, that expression that I've highlighted on the right here from the book indicates a certain type of language that does compare to other languages you've learned. In Java, the syntax or the word that you would use in place of the colon is what? Let's see if you read the previous chapter. Extends, that is correct, very good. So this symbol here, and I should do it with my mouse so that our video watchers can understand. This symbol is the equivalent of saying that this class extends this system class. Now I want you to notice that it says System Web User Interface Page. Now, are you guys noticing that up top here? That we're pulling in the web library already, right? So then the question becomes, do I need this? What's your guess? Somebody is nodding yes. Okay, you know what? Let's put it in and then see if that solves all the red underlines, right? Because I have red underlines and I'm concerned about them. Well, voila. Okay, so that's the reason why they want you to put it there. So even though we have that whole system library available to us, that just means we can use its methods. That's different than extending it and becoming a child class to the parent, or super and subclass, if you want to think of it that way. So having access to the methods of something is not the same as instantiating. Okay, and that's a distinct difference. All right, so now we have, well, most of our red underlines are fixed, but we still have a couple others. Now, why? Let me move this off screen here. Is there anything else that's different here that we're missing? Because I have these underlines, and you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to read it, and it says, the modifier public is not valid for this item. And then if I look at what's in the book, well, he's using public, right? So why is it wrong? Say that louder, Brian.
Step 3.
Oh, you got to do step 3. All right. That's exactly correct. So if you look at actually step 3, it says save and close the file. Well, I'm not going to close it. I'm going to leave it open. All right, so I'm going to do a Control-S to save. Now we want to open the login ASPX file and then open its code behind page. So we actually want to jump over here and look at that C# file. And then also notice, and I'll pull the book back over. I think that this is a good time to have both on screen. That notice some different approaches here. And it is actually telling us that, well, the login page was already pulling in that one file that we just extended in the base page, right? Now, the reason it does that is because we didn't have a base page. So that's the why, all right? So now what we're doing is, since the base page extends that library, this page is going to extend the base page. So I'm actually just going to change my syntax here to base page. It finds it automatically. So you saw it like underline and recolor itself. And now it found that. So conceptually what's happening again is the base page extended that library that the login page was automatically doing, but because we're inserting a base page, we now need to switch the login page code behind file, if I still have that open, to extend the base page, which is extending the one that we were extending. So we're really, in essence, still doing the same thing. It's just that we have a code section that's in between now. Go ahead and do a Control-S to save. That was a pretty significant step. Hopefully you grabbed a little bit of meaning from that. All right. Now the book in step number 4 on page 222 says that you should run it and say that it tells us there's build errors, but I'm going to run without debugging, and then it's going to crash, right? And notice that it says here, it actually gives us an error. And actually, I'm seeing actually a different error than what the book is showing. What is my error? Isn't that interesting? My error says that it's expecting a curly bracket. I must have, okay. You know what that's called, Brian? I screwed up. That's what that's called. Okay, so I'm going to fix that. All right. Yeah, so, yeah, I always got to watch that stuff. It did actually tell me which file to look in, too. I mean, I recognize the file. But is it right? Am I missing a curly bracket here? Well, this looks okay to me. Now the question becomes, where's the curly bracket missing? So here's what say that again? Okay. So where do I need to put it? Here? Above public. All right, I'm going to check the book. Not that I don't trust you, but I look at the book. Yep. I basically, what I did is when I did all my copy pasting, because it's over 2 pages, I skipped this one. So I do need to put it in basically here. And now you see the public fixed itself. Yay! All right. And there was a lot of rejoicing going on. Okay. All right, so let's try that step again. Save the file, run it. No debugging necessary at this point. And hopefully it came up. Right? Or wait. We were supposed to generate an error, right? And what's the error we were supposed to generate in step number 4? It was supposed to recognize that a page cannot be untitled or an empty string. What page are we rendering? Well, it's the default. Okay, let's go ahead and close it. Now, what that's telling me is if I go to the default page, that it doesn't have a title. It should throw an error. So what I'm thinking has happened here, folks, is that in Visual Studio 2015 probably is where they switched it, or 2017, that that no longer triggers an error. You can absolutely, and Jason, you're right. So if I were just to look at like a standard page, and in this case I would have to look at my front-end master, you can run a page without a title. In HTML, that will work just fine. It's not considered good practice, but this is different because really what's happening is on these pages, the title is actually generated here. So they want us to go in and actually change in this content page, and they want us to type in log in to Planet Rocks, like that. So that's going to be a step that you're going to need to take. So this little attribute here, and what that's telling you is that it pushes a title into the front-end master in the title section. I didn't mean to detach that, but just in case you guys didn't know that, you can detach these, right? Have you guys ever done that? Right? You absolutely can. If you're second screening like I am, it's kind of a fun little thing. All right. Well, that should also tell you that you probably need one here. And I don't know, why don't we just call it Planet Rocks? I don't know if they told us to name it anything. But whether you got the error or not, and it's going to depend on the version of Visual Studio that you're using. All right. So they want you to go through all the different pages on your site. Now, you really want to be persnickety about it. That means all of these. Well, but wait, these aren't built on the master page, are they? No, so we don't need to worry about it. But any page that is, and right now we only have the two, the default and the login, they need to have titles up here, so make sure you get those put in there. The other thing that you want to do is you want to go into the code behind pages for those as well, and make sure that, like we did in the login page code behind, that we switch that extension to base page. So the only other page you really need to worry about is the default page. So the default code behind file, we're going to switch that to base page and save it. Now the one thing that they do in step number 6, top of page 223, is they want you to learn how to use a find and replace tool. If you guys are used to using those types of tools, they usually are accessible from one of the menus here, and I always go to the edit menu first, and most applications will have it there. And you can bring up the dialog, and they have the hotkey for it is Control-Shift-H, right? Which is replace. So it triggers the find and replace feature. It's a pretty standard thing in a lot of programs, and I use this a lot when I'm working with projects where they get really complex, right? And when you're trying to make a change like this, so like if we had, I don't know, 20 pages already created, and we're making the same change, this would be a logical place to do it. So what I would do, just like the book recommends, is I would do a search for this. I'm going to copy it in. So what would I be searching for? This. And then replace with base page. You type it in, paste it in, whatever. And then look in specific spots. So you could look in certain folders. You could look through the whole project. And you got to be careful with that, right? Because you got to remember that the base page has that in there. You don't want to replace that one, right? So just be really cautious with how you do it. And what they recommend is if you are going to do this, that you type in, base page, no spaces, that you go to the find options, and you look at certain types of files, and what they would suggest is like star.aspx.cs files. Those are the ones you want to look at, not the ones that are just straight CS files like this one. Okay? I'm not going to run this because I've already made the changes, but if you were working on a complicated project, there are tools built in to allow you to change like 100 pages with one mouse click. You know, but be really, really careful and make a backup before you do it. If that sounds like experience, it is. You know, because I've done stuff like that in other IDEs and this one, and I know I did that once in Dreamweaver and screwed up like several hundred pages. and I didn't have a backup, so then I had to be really careful and fix it all and then go back and check everything. So then that was like a half day's work just to do that. So be really careful about those kind of tools and be cautious and think about what you're doing before you just do it. All right. Save your work. They want us to pull it up in the browser again, so let's go ahead and do that. All right, hit the login page. Okay, no errors. I didn't have any errors last time. It worked anyhow, but if you were having the error before, it should be fixed now. All right, let's move on to the next section here and see if we can go through one more try it out before we call it a night. It'll be a challenge because we don't have a lot of time left, but we'll try. Let me close all these unnecessary windows here. Back over to Visual Studio. So now we're going to go ahead and add a new web form to the root of the site. So I'm highlighting the root of the site, do a right click, I'm going to add a web form, and we want to make sure it's using the master page. So I'm going to use this quick link here, the one that we created. Notice now, right above that one, there's also a class one, right? So whatever you use often is going to start popping up on that list. So we're going to add this. This is going to be called temporary. Apparently it'll be here forever. And we want to say OK. Now, because I chose web form with master from that quick list, it'll automatically bring up the interface. We don't have too many to choose from here, so go ahead and choose it. Go right to the code behind file for that page. Bring that on up. And we want to make sure that we inherit from the base page. So this is going to become a common thing here. So we're typing base page, automatically recognizes. And then we also want to rename the class from temporary to this weird string that I'm about to paste in. So we're going to replace this with that. There we go. All sorts of underlines, right? All right. So now we have that in place. And now we need to make another switch. And this is kind of to show you how things are connected. So and I'm going to take just a super quick pause here to point that out. So we're at the top of page 226, step number 3. And what they're saying is we want to go to the page now and switch to markup view, which we're already in. But notice that inside that declaration at the top, how there's an inherits, right? And this inherits needs to match up with that class file name. So we are going to paste in that same string of text in this spot, right? And it cautions us really carefully in the book here. It says, you must leave the code file attribute alone. Don't change that, because the name of the file is the name of the file regardless of what. Yeah, okay. So we're kind of doing some stuff that in some ways is considered a no-no, you know. I mean, like the class file should match the name of the file, but we're doing some clever stuff here. So we got to just make sure that this inherits is the same as what's in this code file here, okay? All right. So that would complete step number 3, page 226. All right. If you want, go ahead and you can do a Control S on each one of these. Yes, it seems like we're broken, but don't worry about it right now. Okay. All right. Now we're doing something that is kind of strange, and you don't kind of see the result of this until you kind of get all the way through the chapter. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through a step on step number 5 here, where we're actually going to do an export. So we're going to go to the File menu. Yeah. So, yeah, we're going to move to Brian. Thank you, sir. Export template. Right. So thank you for pointing that out quickly so I didn't have to fumble through it myself. But that is actually a change that they made in the 2015 version. Remember, this book's written on 2012. So it works in 2012 and 13, but not 2015 and 17. So that export is in a different menu, but it's under the website menu. And we'll bring up this interface here. Now this is kind of interesting because you're going to see two options here. We're going to be choosing the second option, which is we are exporting one item as a template. But it's possible that if you have like a basic structure for a site created that you really like, you can export the whole thing as a project template. And guess what? A lot of design houses and a lot of professionals do exactly this. They create really cool menus, or they have like a certain website look for one part of the company and they want to recreate it for the other part. They can export the whole project as a template, bring it in, and just replace content and really accelerate workflow pretty significantly. So we are going to choose the item template. It automatically selects names and stuff for us. Go ahead and click Next. All right. And then you're going to get this like weird box here, and we're selecting what we're going to export. And what we are looking to export is this temporary ASPX page, which we created temporarily just for the sake of doing this. You guys seeing where we're going now? All right. Doesn't seem logical when you're starting, but that's what we're doing. So next, it should be clicked, and then holy cow, I think I'm just going to skip this. Right? Who wants to read all that, right? No, but if you were doing very specific things, then you can kind of look through some of these things that are listed here. You might actually need to have some of these things follow. In this case, we don't need to because we aren't using any of these components yet, but if you were, you would know because things would stop working. So no worries there. Go ahead and click Next. All right. When we get to this next screen here, we do want to change the template name to my, oops, I hit caps lock there, my base page. And you want to put in a description, go for it. I'm not putting one in. And then when you're all done with that, just go ahead and click Finish. All right. Now you can notice what it did. It created a zip file. In this case, it's not really going to contain a lot. I mean, you can go ahead and take a look inside. It's not really all that mysterious. But what it did is it created an icon file, a Visual Studio template file, and then the two files that we created in the project are zipped into it. If you go back up a level, notice where it is storing it. You guys seeing this? By default, it goes into your Documents folder, a Visual Studio folder, and I exported templates. So when you're looking for this later, know where it is. Does it have to reside here? No, it doesn't. You can be anywhere, really. But this is where it puts it. So if you're like me, where I'm like everything's going into Google Drive, not mental note, that's where this file is. Know where to go back to it. All right, step number 9, bottom of 227. Now we're going to come back in here and we're going to delete this temporary file. And when I delete the main file, it also deletes the code behind file with it. And our task there is done. Now we're going to right-click the root of the project one more time, and then we're going to do an Add New Item. And in this case, we're going to come in here, and then I want you to notice somewhere inside here, and you guys tell me where to find it and how I can find it. Can I find it? What am I looking for? It says, the instructions say, note that your custom template now shows up in the list of templates. Does yours? Is anybody's? Okay. So why doesn't mine not? Do I have too much stuff in here? Am I looking in the wrong spot? Yes, Brian? Ah, okay. You know what? That's exactly correct. Now, I have a little flag in my book because this happens every year, right? It's like, I don't see it. It's not working. And I get the emails on it. So to save those emails, Brian, you're right. Now, Visual Studio automatically will recognize the things that are in those exported template folders when it launches. But we created it while it was running, so it doesn't see it yet. So, yes, we are reopening the whole thing. But that forces Visual Studio to look in that folder and find it. So I'm going to go back, open website, open the site. Yeah, you would think, right? Unfortunately, there's not. Okay, so now let's go ahead and do that same process again. We're going to add new item, and then voila, my mouse happened to be right on it. How magical is that? There's my base page. Isn't that cool? All right, so we're going to go ahead and select that now, and they are going to want us to type in a new name, and that should be test page. .aspx, and click add. Now they want us, it says to look at the code behind files, so let's do that. There's test page. Open that up, look at the CS, and then it says, and verify that this has been renamed. Are you guys noticing that there's an underscore in front of it? And instead of pulling in the thing from that goofy looking string that we put in before, it drops in underscore test page. And it's just a convention that happens inside the tool. So what's kind of neat about that is that special code that we put in allowed us to dynamically build off of that structure. And so now we can kind of build off of that structure like we're doing with master pages. So we're combining these two tools now that really gives us a lot of power for creating consistent looking websites. Now the next section of this chapter, which we're not going to be able to complete tonight, is to start working with themes. And what I'm going to push you guys to do, because you're not going to have enough time to wait for me till next week because otherwise your work would be late, is look at the archive videos if you need guidance stepping through this. But this part of the chapter is a lot of fun. So we created master pages, we created a base page, which gives us for coding, and then you guys are going to create themes. The themes are a whole lot of fun and really powerful. All right, that ends tonight's lecture, folks. We'll see you next week.